The canon that identifies as medical ethics actually tracks back to the 5th century and the medical studies of Hippocrates and the familiar promise found in the Hippocratic Oath: first, do no harm. History, in both the oral and written tradition, have long documented the dehumanization and devaluing of Black and brown bodies under the guise of medical and scientific breakthrough. While the Tuskegee syphilis study, where African American men were fraudulently enrolled in and then not treated in a medical study, is the most widely discussed, it's really just another sad placeholder in a long line of medical and ethical violations visited on minority communities. There's Dr. James Marion Sims, the father of modern gynecology, whose celebrated breakthroughs came at the expense of Black women who were forced to undergo medical procedures without anesthesia, because he believed that Black people didn't feel pain in the same way as whites. And then there's the story of Henrietta Lacks.
In 1951, Henrietta Lacks came to Johns Hopkins Hospital with cervical cancer. While there, doctors removed some of her tumor cells and discovered they could thrive in a lab. It was something human cells had never done before.
This biopsy taken from Henrietta Lacks produced a cell line that would grow essentially forever and was immediately distributed all over the world.
Named HeLa cells after Lacks, they were used by Jonas Salk to discover the polio vaccine. They also aided research in cancer, AIDS, and diabetes. Dr. Francis Collins, director of the National Institutes of Health, says they've saved millions of lives.
This is everywhere.
But Lacks, poor and uneducated, died in the hospital, and the scientists took the cells without her consent.
Tonight, under the glare of a global pandemic, we're once again faced with balancing questions of health, trust, government, and history.
Good evening and welcome to our vaccine information session. My name is Tony Clark. I'm the proud president of My Brother's Keeper Cambridge. We are excited for tonight's conversation for a number of reasons. This conversation is led by a friend and a partner of ours in this work, Dr. Wayne Altman and his team. Just want to give a quick story about Dr. Wayne. Several months ago, about almost a year ago, he met with us and he told us to dream big. And so this is part of the big dream, putting together information sessions such as this, providing context for the vaccine, for those who have taken it, for those who will take it, and for those who are maybe on the fence. So we're excited this evening to provide our community of Cambridge and our friends and neighbors from elsewhere information about the COVID-19 vaccine. So at this moment, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend, Dr. Wayne Altman.
Thank you so much, Tony. It's great to be here. And we hope that we'll have the opportunity to answer a lot of your questions tonight. We are not here to convince you of anything or talk you into anything tonight. We're here to offer you information and answer your questions and help you make a decision that you feel is right for you and your family. And so we have a presentation that we would like to share with you to kind of get started. Might take about 20 minutes, and then we'll be ready to answer questions. I am joined by two third-year medical students from Tufts Medical School, Tony LaRequente.
How you doing?
Caitlin Keenan. And all three of us are going to share some of the information that we've put together for you. And hold on to your questions till the end, or you can put them in the chat, and we'll have some time, plenty of time at the end to answer questions. So we'll start with, what is COVID-19? I think this is information that a lot of you already have. And one thing that's really interesting is where COVID-19 got its name. It's called the coronavirus, and shortened for coronavirus disease is COVID. And we call it 19 because it was discovered in the year 2019. So that's always interesting to see those kind of things. And so when you think about COVID-19, it's got about a 1% mortality rate, which is about 10 times as high as the flu, just to give you a little bit of perspective. And I think many of us know the symptoms, including fever and cough and fatigue, the really interesting loss of taste and smell, which can go on for several months. And this is essentially a virus that infects the lungs. I'm going to turn things over to Caitlin to tell you a little bit more.
So I think a really great question that I've heard from some patients is, do we have medications that can cure COVID-19 if we get infected with it? So I'll try to answer that question. So there are studies that show dexamethasone, which is an anti-inflammatory steroid medication, actually does improve survival in patients who are infected with COVID and who are so sick that they're requiring oxygen in the hospital. Just to give a sense of how much it helps. So if there were 10 patients sick with COVID who would have died if they were untreated, giving all of them dexamethasone will save 3 of them. So it's not a great treatment. It's not going to save the majority of sick patients, but it will improve survival a small amount. We have other medications called remdesivir and bamlanivimab. These are antiviral medications. They do help symptoms like cough and fatigue, and they shorten recovery, but unfortunately they don't improve survival. So to put that in picture form, of the 10 patients very sick who would have died from COVID untreated, if we give them all these medications, all 10 of the patients will still die. So I guess the message here is that we don't have a great medical treatment for this virus as of now. So that leads us to discuss vaccines. Our best option is essentially trying to prevent infection with this virus. And I'll just open it up for a second. You don't have to speak up if it's uncomfortable, but does anybody who's on the call right now have an idea about how vaccines work and wants to share? All right, so we can move ahead and talk about how vaccines work. So I like to think of it as a lock and a key. So this seems unrelated to vaccines, but it actually is. So imagine that you had to design the perfect key to open up a lock. So think about what materials you would need and how you might approach that problem. There's a lot of good answers to this question. One approach would be to try a million different keys and see if any of them fit in the lock. You could also take the key that seems to be the best fit, even if it's not perfect, and then shave and refine that key until it fits into the lock just right. And interestingly, this is exactly what our bodies do to develop the perfect antibody that can attach to the surface of the COVID virus and kill it. And so we have just a very cartoony illustration of that here. So this circle with the spikes coming off of it represents the virus. And then antibodies are these Y-shaped proteins that, just like a lock and a key, fit perfectly together. The body kind of shaves them and modifies them and tries lots of them until it finds the perfect fitting one to attach to the virus. And so the way that the vaccine works is that it gives our immune system sort of a sneak peek of what the virus surface looks like. And that way, our immune system can make antibodies, can make these protective proteins so that if we get exposed to COVID, it's ready to go and it can fight the virus. All right, so I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Altman.
Okay, let me slide back over here. So we need 2 shots with Pfizer and Moderna. Okay, and you can see here in this graph, with the initial vaccination, at about 3 weeks, you're about 65%, 67% immune. That immunity will dip a little bit, and then you get your booster, then you come up, and then it dips again, and then it levels out about right here, which is excellent immunity for the vaccination. So that gives you a sense of why you need that booster. Let's see. As to why it's not advancing. Should I pause it? Resume share. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Just give me 1 second. There we go. So, one of the questions we hear a lot of people ask is, how did scientists make this vaccine so quickly? Well, the truth is, the technology that these vaccines are using was actually dreamt up by a woman in 1995 who said, I think I'm onto something. And then she applied for funding to advance that and was told, no money for you. This isn't worth anything. And for about 10 years, she was shut down until finally people realized, no, this actually could be good. And then that technology was kind of regenerated, but we actually got lucky because the COVID-19 virus has what are called spike proteins on the outer side of its surface. You can see those red things poking out of the COVID-19 virus. If you look at the common cold virus, there's nothing poking out. That's why we've never been able to get a vaccine for the common cold virus. And so that really was the key to helping us develop a vaccine so quickly. The other key was that the entire world dropped everything it was doing, and every scientist that had this kind of wherewithal started working on it last January, February. Why is this happening? Okay. And so who can get the COVID-19 vaccination? Well, there was phase 1, healthcare workers and nursing homes and other folks. Phase 2, we got to folks who are 75 plus, then to 65 plus with 2 medical conditions. And starting next Thursday, a week from today, on March 11th, that will transition into teachers and staff, educational staff, and childcare workers. And then the next step will be essential workers, individuals with 1 medical condition, and then eventually the general public. And that's the direction we've been moving. So we're getting there, and the president suggested that every single person who wants to be vaccinated should be able to get vaccinated by the end of May. I believe he made that statement yesterday. I personally think we could go even faster than that, but that's pretty good news. And so the current stage we're at, these 2 plus, these 2 conditions that we're talking about, this is a list of those conditions that if someone had 2 of these conditions, they would be eligible for this vaccine, even if they're not 65 years old. And so how do we choose? Because there's Pfizer and Moderna, and we just got approved for use as the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And there's 2 doses for Pfizer and Moderna, just 1 dose for Johnson & Johnson. For all 3 of them, the injection site is the shoulder muscle. Okay. And so, all the experts are recommending that you don't try and choose, you just take what you can get. And so, of note, the Pfizer, you get your 2nd dose 3 weeks later. The Moderna, you get your dose 4 weeks later. And so before we get to this, I just want to say, in terms of choosing, I feel like I see on the news, they say, it is recommended that you just get what you can get and don't ask questions and just take whatever you can get. And kind of doesn't leave me with warm and fuzzy feelings when people say that. And so I want to give you a little bit of data on this to help you feel, I hope, a little bit better about that. I've already been vaccinated, and I got the Moderna vaccine. If I were going to be vaccinated right now and someone said, it has to be one of these 3, and they didn't even tell me which one, they said, you're going to get one of the 3 and we're not going to tell you which one, I honestly wouldn't care. Okay. And the reason is because you may have heard that Pfizer and Moderna are about 95% effective, and that Johnson & Johnson is about 72% effective in the United States. but that's for all infection. For each of these, they were 100% effective at preventing hospitalization and death. Just wrap your heads around that for a second. We actually created a vaccine that in trials with about 40,000 people, not one person died from COVID-19 or even had to be hospitalized from COVID-19 from this, who got this vaccine. It's really quite extraordinary. The other thing about Johnson & Johnson is that there are some new variants, and it looks like Johnson & Johnson is very effective against these variants. And so all three of these are an excellent choice to help prevent yourself from severe illness, hospitalization, or death from COVID-19. And now I'm going to hand this over to Tony.
Line here. All right, hey everyone, my name's Tony. And so kind of the rest of this this presentation will be centered sort of around the COVID-19 vaccines and the three we have. And so again, we like to center a lot of questions that we think are common with our patients. And one of those is, is the vaccine safe just as a vaccine itself? And so from our perspective, as far as what different types of people is it safe for? Is it safe for everyone? And so we looked to sort of the trials that the vaccine was tested on. And so, first and foremost, these trials included people that were on the older side, people that were on the younger side, and everyone in between. And then, even more than that, these trials included both healthy people and people that have, the same conditions that Dr. Altman was previously talking about, that are those candidates for those two conditions in order to receive the vaccine. So that would include people, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, as well as people with HIV and other infections. And so it is also of note, that these trials, the demographics of these trials, while being predominantly 80% white, they did also include around 20 to 30% of people of color, and as well as 10% of the people of color included populations of African American descent. And it is also of note that these vaccines don't contain eggs, latex, preservative, or the live virus itself. And so some people ask, I have an allergy to this food or this type of medical thing like latex, but these vaccines don't contain that. And then as well, the big talk we get a lot is around, am I going to get an allergic reaction? A lot of you might have heard, you got to wait 15 minutes before before they let you go after you get your vaccine to look for an allergic reaction. And, we have this, this implemented to be on the safe side of things, but, on the reality, these, a severe allergic reaction to one of these vaccines is 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million. And so, as far as allergic reactions, in my experience, I have not seen it. But it is something, that's why we wait that 15 minutes for that rare case that an allergic reaction might happen. And that's why, as doctors, when we do our clinics, we carry around EpiPens, which is sort of the cure to an allergic reaction. All right, so we're gonna kind of go in like a time order. Let's say you say, I'm ready to get my first dose. What am I in store for? And so your first dose will be, like Dr. Altman said, usually it's a dose in your arm. And so the main thing with the first dose is any side effects. So most people from the first dose feel very little to nothing. But the reported side effects that people may feel, kind of going in order, would be, a sore arm, just fatigue all around, headaches, as well as body aches. And interestingly enough, these side effects start 6 to 10 hours after the vaccine, and then really kind of, from what I've seen, they kind of end pretty fast, 1 to 2 days after. And so that would be the bulk of what you're going to see as far as side effects from the first dose. And so, you get your first dose, and then they say, they'll probably give you a little card and say, here's the date for your second dose. And like Dr. Altman said, for Pfizer, it'll be 3 weeks later, for Moderna, 4 weeks later, and for the Johnson & Johnson, they won't give you a card because it's just one dose. And so let's say you're, is it okay if I'm late for my second dose? Let's say you can't quite make it on that specific day at that specific time. That's totally okay. So the studies that we have that have been studied for the Pfizer and Moderna and vaccines, the ones that need 2 doses, it's okay if you're 4 days early or 6 weeks late. Now, as providers, we try to get you as close to that 3 or 4 week time spot, but there's no need to start over if you're late or even just a little bit early for that dose. And so now we move on to that second dose. Let's say you came a day late, that's totally fine, and you get your second dose. Now here, when we talk about side effects, they are reported at a greater rate than the first dose. And the side effects are include still, that sore arm, that fatigue, and the body ache, with the inclusion of both fever and or chills with that. But just like the first dose, they start around 6 to 10 hours after the vaccine and end 1 to 2 days later. And just on a side note of the second dose, I have, the immune system is working because we've seen that, some people get worried that they're having really whole body effects to the dose. And that's often worrying, a lot of times we can think, did I just get COVID from the actual vaccine? But what that is really telling you is it's your body telling you that, your immune system is working, and it's working hard to find that lock and key, what Caitlin was talking about. Now, on the other hand, if you don't feel any side effects, that doesn't mean your immune system isn't working, but it certainly means that you might have been just one of the lucky ones that didn't really experience any side effects. But your immune system will definitely be kicking in once you get that first and second dose. And so the last thing about the side effects that we want to talk about is, how could we, treat our side effects? And so our advice as providers and doctors is, first and foremost, rest and fluids. That's going to be definitely invaluable to, really anything in life. But definitely with the COVID vaccine, making sure you can get rest and you're getting some good rest even before the vaccine, and really getting those fluids. And medication, if you must, you can take Tylenol or Advil, are both safe medications for pain. But we recommend to avoid taking it before you get your vaccine, and sort of judge it to see, if you're in a definite significant amount of pain from the vaccine, to take Tylenol or Advil. And so for side effects, you can take that every 4 to 6 hours as needed. All right, so this is my last slide. So the vaccine is done. You had your side effects. They went away in 2 days. You had a little bit of fevers, you had some body aches, but you slept it out. And let's say you had really, really bad pain, and you took one Tylenol and you felt a little bit better. So the real question here is, are you immune? Am I immune? And so this is a little bit what Dr. Altman was talking about those numbers and the differences between the Johnson & Johnson and the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine. And so this is a lot of numbers and a lot of text on this screen, but we'll try to break it down real quick. So for the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, after the first dose and after 3 weeks, you're going to get around 67% immunity. And so that's going to be that curve that you're going to have 67. And then before your second dose, it's going to dip a little bit because the immunity kind of fluctuates. But after you get your second dose, you'll have about 95% of immunity 2 weeks after your second dose. So it sort of dips, but when you get your second dose, it comes right back up, and then it kind of stabilizes at 95. Now, the difference is the Johnson & Johnson being one dose, you're going to get around 72% immunity, and that's what's studied in the US. And so that's kind of actually a sweet spot almost between the first dose and the second dose. But like Dr. Altman said, there are advantages to the J&J. There's a possible maybe, as it might be better for COVID variants and things like that as we look towards the future. But as I want to echo what Dr. Altman said, I was also vaccinated as a medical student as we rotate through different hospitals and see many different patients. And I also, I would say, just, give me whichever one, is available. That's sort of my own personal speaking in that. But as Dr. Altman was saying, we want you to speak up and ask questions, because that's what's important. We never want our patients and our communities to really be sort of sort of picking something without having all the information. We're here to teach and we're here to support. And so just a quick word on the immunity. So the immunity is pretty much the same thing as preventing infection. And this is kind of what Dr. Altman was saying, is that, it's 70, 67, then 95 or 72 for the J&J vaccine at preventing infection. However, all these vaccines are 100% effective at preventing hospitalization and death. And then as far as the transmission of COVID, it's still a bit unclear, but there's likely decreased transmission for people. So that would mean that, if I'm vaccinated, there might be a decreased chance that I might give, if I got some particles on me, then I might give it to someone else. But that's still, being studied. And so that's still a bit unclear, but we just want to, share with you the knowledge that we get so that, we can all make informed decisions. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Altman to talk about, life after COVID and life after the COVID vaccine, that is.
Okay, so after the vaccine, very exciting. 2 weeks passes after you get your second dose and you have achieved your maximum immunity. So you are ready to party like it's 1998, not quite 1999. Okay, and I have to say, I've been really disappointed in some of the medical students who, some of them actually asked me, who is Prince? And that was really disappointing, but they need to be educated. So here we are. Here's what you need to do after your vaccine. You still need to stay physically distant. You still need to avoid large gatherings. And you still need to wear masks, which kind of makes you scratch your head and begs the question, well, what the heck are we doing here then? When can we end this pandemic? When can we get back to normal? Okay. And so take a look at this cartoon. So that's where we say, please stop. Please, it's going to be so tempting to start acting normal again, but we're not quite ready. So when can we get back to normal? When will we be ready? And the answer to that is when the rate of infection goes down enough and the percentage of people vaccinated goes up enough. When those two things happen, one comes down and one comes up, we will get to a sweet spot where we can all start getting back together again without masks and enjoy each other's company and hug our friends and do all those things that we miss so much. I'm looking forward to a Celtics playoff game personally. And so I personally think that this summer we are going to reach that sweet spot. But until then, we have to be careful because it is still possible that a vaccinated person could have an asymptomatic infection and spread that to another person who has not been vaccinated. And that's what is concerning. So hopefully we will work together and do our parts to prevent infection in a variety of different ways so we can end this pandemic. There's a nice summer photo. Hopefully we can all get back together in Cambridge and congregate. And I will open it back up to Tony and the MBK team, and we will happily answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Altman. Really appreciative. I believe we have a couple of questions in the chat. Can I read a couple?
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll read the first one. It reads, well, I'll read one of them. Will there be a third booster for the newer variants with Moderna?
Maybe.
Okay.
How informative this doctor is. We have no idea. It is a definite possibility, though. There might be another booster. We might be getting every year, like the flu shot, a COVID shot. Maybe they'll combine the flu shot and the COVID shot, and we get it together every year. All these things are possible, but we just don't have enough data to know definitively what the answer to that question is. It's a great question.
The next question is, if you recently had a vaccination for something else, can you still get the COVID-19 vaccine?
Very good. So it is advised to have a 2-week window on either side of your COVID vaccine. And if you're getting Moderna and Pfizer, then that's 3 to 4 weeks apart. So really it's 2 weeks before, the 4-week interval, 2 weeks after. So it's really like this 2-month period of time where you shouldn't be getting other vaccinations. And so there shouldn't be any other vaccination within 2 weeks on either side of either dose of your COVID vaccine. Hope that makes sense.
Awesome. Our next question is from one of our guests. I became very sick with flu symptoms up to 5 days after getting the first Moderna vaccine. What would cause such a severe reaction?
Okay, so first of all, that sucks. Second of all, that's unusual, but we do hear about people because as we presented, most people are done after 2 days, but there certainly have been people who've gone 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days with side effects from the vaccination. What would cause it? It's your brisk immune system doing its job and kind of hanging on for a little bit longer, making sure that you're immune. So it sucked while it lasted, but it's good news for you because it means your immune system was doing its job.
Okay. Another one is, if both people have been vaccinated, can we ride in the same car together and be in each other's home without wearing masks?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't think it's been answered clearly. You have to ask yourself, are any of you high risk? Are any of you older or have other medical conditions that make you higher risk if you get COVID-19 to get severely ill? And on the other hand, you could argue back and say, well, wait a second, didn't you just tell me that it's 100% effective against hospitalization and death? Yes, I did. That's exactly what I said. And so I think that as infection rates come down and we start getting to a higher percentage who have been vaccinated, we can start having smaller gatherings and a little bit larger gatherings and start to take our masks off and start to kind of dial back the precautions that we've been taking. But it's going to be kind of a slow, gradual process as those numbers come up and come down.
Another question that says, why not pre-medicate?
Okay, so it's a great question. A lot of medical people, including myself, there's a lot of talk like amongst the doctors. Hey, did you take Tylenol? Did you take Advil with your symptoms when you got side effects from the vaccine? I don't think, I didn't take ibuprofen. I tried to avoid it because ibuprofen's anti-inflammatory and I just worry that it might mess up the vaccine if we take this. And do we have good data to support that worry? Not at all. Okay. However, there were some very small studies that looked at people taking different vaccines and measured their antibody levels months after the vaccine, comparing people who took Tylenol or Advil versus people who took none of that stuff. And the people who took the Tylenol and Advil had slightly smaller, lower antibody levels. Now, that lower antibody level could be completely irrelevant, might not have mattered at all, because what we really care about is, did people get more infected if they took Tylenol or ibuprofen compared to the ones who didn't? And that we don't even know. And these studies were really small. So if we were to go by the right evidence, the answer is you can do whatever the heck you want with Tylenol or Advil. But if you are like me and you worry just a little bit that taking these medicines might kind of decrease the effectiveness of the vaccine, then do what I did with each of my 2 doses. I didn't take it before the dose. And when I started, I didn't really get any side effects with the first one, but with the second one, it knocked me down for a day. I took it on a Saturday morning. And by Saturday after dinner, I started feeling achy and tired, a little bit of a headache. And by bedtime, I had some chills, a little bit of fever. likewise the next morning, and caught up on some TV shows. I call that Netflix and chills, Tony. That's different than Netflix and chill. Okay. And I didn't take any Tylenol or Advil. I kind of just sucked it up and just kind of got under some covers and drink some water and just deal with it. And then that Sunday night was the Super Bowl, and I kind of wanted to enjoy the game. And so my wife told me, just take one Tylenol and enjoy the game. So I did. I postponed it as long as I could, took one Tylenol, thoroughly enjoyed the game, and then my symptoms were gone. Okay, so postpone, don't pre-medicate, postpone. If you're miserable, take it. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Okay, and if you can avoid it altogether, awesome. Hope that answers that question.
Yeah, my question is, who were you rooting for in the Super Bowl?
Listen, Tom Brady's given us 6 Super Bowls in 20 years. I got to be loyal to him.
Okay. Our next question is, if someone has nerve-related difficulties and is on medication, is this vaccine safe to take in that situation?
Nerve-related difficulties?
Yes.
And is on medication? Yes. There aren't really any medications that I'm aware of. I'm going to look at Tony and Caitlin that are reasons why you should not take the vaccine. Caitlin, are you aware of any medication? We'll double check that, but I don't believe there are medications where you say, oh, I'm on that medication, I better not take the vaccine.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, what are examples of severe reactions that require medical attention?
Yeah, so the side effects we were talking about are not severe reactions. Those are kind of just, they come with the territory, you kind of get through it, and you're fine. Severe reactions, like Tony said, are 1 in 100,000 to closer to 1 in a million. Okay. And we've, in our practice, knock wood, we have vaccinated well over 1,000 people and not seen any severe reactions. And I haven't talked to any other doctors who have seen severe reactions. What we're talking about is a severe allergic reaction where people will get really swollen up, severe rashes, have trouble breathing. And if that happens, you treat it with an EpiPen and should be fine. But hope not to see that. But we've vaccinated, I don't know, 10, 20 million people so far, and that's the rate. It's close to 1 in a million. And no one's died from that reaction. It's been treated successfully every time it's happened.
And you said you vaccinated over 1,000 and you haven't seen anyone come back?
Nope.
Okay. All right. Our next question is, I'm not sure I understand about asymptomatic COVID. I will have my second Moderna vaccine next week. I'm 82. I'd love to visit family, but could I carry the virus?
Yeah, what Moderna would say is 95% chance you won't be carrying the virus, right? But there's still that 5% that you could be carrying the virus. Could you still transmit it to somebody else? I would say there's a way less likely chance of you doing that, but it's still possible. So maybe you go visit somebody and you wear a mask when you're with them. You want to have a meal with them? Maybe you try and sit with a little distance from them and open some windows and get some ventilation going. So I think you can dial down your, really high level of precautions that I compliment you and recognize you for taking a little bit.
Okay. Thank you. The next question is, how long is the immunity?
Wouldn't we all like to know? We know it's at least 3 months. We think it should be at least a year. We hope it'll be longer, and we're all eager to find out. Nobody knows.
Okay. This is a relatively long, it's not a long question, but I may have to ask it twice.
So hold on one second.
My 46-year-old daughter, yep.
Oh, just to add one other thing to that last answer is the thing about the pandemic, though, is even if the immunity only lasts a year, if the level of number of people infected comes way down and the people vaccinated comes way up, now the amount of COVID around is so little that even as our immunity starts to go down, This time around, we'll be a lot smarter, and we won't let it get to crazy levels if we see that people's immunity is starting to wane. 26-year-old daughter.
My 46-year-old daughter
Okay.
is an invalid, almost totally paralyzed from MS. She also has severe asthma with lung damage as a result. Can she safely take the vaccine, especially since I had a severe reaction from the vaccine?
What I would say, that's a really great question. What I would say for this 46-year-old woman, it would be actually very dangerous for her not to take the vaccine. Because of her risk factors, she's a person who I would really want to get vaccinated.
Okay. That's a question I have. Will we have to be revaccinated for the new variants as well?
We don't know. What I will say is we got a little bit worried at the outset when we started dealing with these new variants, and it looks like the vaccines are doing pretty well with most of the variants. And so early returns say maybe not, hopefully not, but we don't know for sure. It's possible.
Awesome. Okay. I have a family member that got their first shot, then caught the virus. Is that normal? Or what's the reasoning for that? What's the reasoning for that?
Well, so you get your first shot. That's wicked unlucky. You get your first shot, and after 3 weeks, you're 67% immune, but you're 33% unimmune. So if you get exposed, after that first shot, before the second shot, you still definitely could get infected. It's unlucky.
The next question is, I have chronic migraines and worry that the vaccine will cause me to have one. Is taking my migraine medication okay?
Yes, and it might. You're absolutely right about that. It certainly could. And so taking your migraine medication or having it ready at hand, it's a great idea.
Okay. The next question is, a few years ago, I suffered from DVT and PE, including a saddle clot. I've heard some chatter that the vaccine can cause blood clots in some patients. Have you heard anything about this? And should I be concerned about being vaccinated?
I have not heard about blood clots with the vaccine, and I think you definitely should get vaccinated. I would turn to the medical students. Have you heard anything about blood clots in the vaccine? We'll double check that, but none of us have heard of that. COVID infection promotes blood clots, but COVID vaccine should not. Good point.
Okay. If you have a severe reaction to the first dose, do you take the second, or does it depend on the severity?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the severity. I think if you had an anaphylactic, severe, life-threatening allergic reaction, yes, you might want to think about getting a different vaccine for your second dose, or kind of maybe waiting on that for a couple months and seeing what it looks like for the immunity. Maybe your immunity is enough with that first one and the infection rate coming down. But otherwise, if you're like that person who got like really bad side effects for 5 days after the first one, no, go get the second one.
Right. Awesome. So when you think about the folks that you vaccinated, what were some of the anxieties that they came in there with? If at all, do they just?
Well, I mean, here's the thing, Tony. We've been in our parking lot on Sunday mornings vaccinating like 200 people at a time. And I can't tell you how many people have been crying. They're so happy to get this vaccine and so grateful, because this last year has sucked for a lot of people. Basically, it sucked for everyone, just some people more than others, right? And I think a lot of people have felt really isolated and depressed and anxious, especially older people. And the idea of getting this vaccine has just meant the world to people. It's really kind of feeling like it's the first day of the rest of your life, and it's an opportunity to turn the corner. And so the people who've come to get the vaccine, we're not hearing them feeling anxious about it. We're hearing them just thrilled to get the vaccine. I think we're hearing, there are some people who are worried and concerned about how quickly we developed the vaccine, and we talked about that in the presentation. The work on this vaccine started 26 years ago, which is kind of weird since COVID-19 didn't exist 26 years ago, but the technology that we use, which is called mRNA, was started 26 years ago. So even though it feels like it was fast, it actually wasn't as fast as you think.
Okay, I have another question, a couple other questions. One is from a resident. My employer requires testing. Do I have to keep being tested after both vaccination? I'm assuming that's COVID testing.
Yeah, well, that's a question you'll have to ask your employer, but I would hope not. That's like uncharted territory. Those policies, I have not heard any policy one direction or another on that, but everyone's going to have to start coming up with those policies very soon.
Okay. Now, can you talk a little about where you've heard that at? And why do you believe that they're going to have to come up with those policies? Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, so there's all kinds of different places like schools and workplaces where everyone has to get tested on a weekly basis or twice a week to make sure everybody's safe and make sure there's not a super spreader event or something like that. And then once everybody in that community is vaccinated, well, do they really need to get tested? It's really expensive, actually. And I think that either they don't need to get tested, or the frequency of the testing could decrease, or you could do something called pool testing, which is really interesting. You can test like 50 people at once and take all the 50, samples and put them in one pool. And if it's negative, then everyone's negative. If it's positive, everyone's got to get retested, but usually it would be negative. So we'll see how that goes. I think the public health people will really have to do some kind of modeling and interesting analyses to determine what's the best next step here.
Great. Should a person who has respiratory issues get the vaccine?
Right away, as soon as they can.
Now, to that end, right? So let's say, obviously, you have the list of the two. Kind of, how did they come up with this list of two? If you don't meet the age requirements, kind of the two.
That list
of
like
what I mean.
12 conditions that you need to have two of.
Right.
Yeah, and by the way,
just to be transparent,
nobody should start smoking to get a second one.
Yeah, that's kind of it's like insane. And so, yeah, I mean, but you came to us in a lot of ways, but I'm also a believer, from the universal gods, that around the idea of looking at particularly BIPOC communities, right? And so, while one may have only one of those things, right? I think we should kind of think about the fact that in terms of the idea of two, I mean, I may have one that's more pronounced that's kind of screwing me up where it's equal to two. So kind of just curious, how do they come to that? And why, and no disrespect to smokers, but like why did that make the list? Just curious.
So when they chose the conditions that made it onto that list, each one of those conditions was a condition that if somebody got COVID, they're at much higher risk for more severe disease. That's the criteria they used to select the things that are on that list.
Okay.
So, truth be told,
I know you broke
is more at risk.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I just say like in terms of, as a non-smoker, and I'm not here to disparage smokers, I feel like it's kind of self-inflicted. But, I don't want to be that guy.
Well, so Tony, just to speak to that, nicotine is an addiction, right?
Right.
And it's very tempting. This is something we teach medical students early on. It's tempting to blame folks for addiction, but I think we've learned a lot about addiction over the last many decades, starting with addiction of crack and cocaine in the 80s, which became much more prevalent, is that it's not a good idea to blame folks who become addicted.
I mean, we did
a lot of that in the 80s, didn't we?
To that end, around in terms of the blame game, there are some folks who are still going to, regardless of what we say, even after vaccination, this long-term kind of effects of the anxiety around, am I really cured? Am I not cured? Or, like, how do we, how do we address that? I mean, obviously, that's something that's real.
There was a question in the chat box that you might be referring to that I just saw.
Yep.
About long-term effects. And you asked what people are anxious about. And that's certainly one thing that we do hear people being anxious about is, how do you know what the long-term effects of this vaccine? It's only been around for 4 months. Like, well, no, that's not true. I mean, it's been around since, the summertime. And it's been in testing since the summertime, but it's been around for less than a year. It's still a very long time. And so how can you speak with confidence and say there'll be no long-term negative effects from this vaccine? And that's a fair question. That's a fair question. And, on the one hand, you cannot speak with confidence. On the other hand, we have a lot of other vaccines that we have used with similar mechanisms as Johnson & Johnson, as Moderna and Pfizer, for other things. And in all kinds of different vaccines with all kinds of different mechanisms, the data seems pretty clear that there are no significant negative long-term effects from any of these vaccines. So we have a lot of track record with a lot of different vaccines for decades that looks really good.
So we got about 7 minutes. I have a couple, three quick questions.
Lightning
one is
rounds.
If one person, lightning rounds. If one person got the vaccine and their partner did not, how does the vaccine impact them sexually? Could the vaccinated person transfer anything to the other person? Should they use birth control as a precaution?
Yeah, so we do not believe that this virus is sexually transmitted. So in no way should vaccination or non-vaccination affect decisions around sexual activity. And practicing safer sex and avoiding sexually transmitted infections is always a good idea.
And this next question, interestingly, I was glad to see our mayors on here. I'm curious, maybe more of a policy question as well, but just to kind of get your take on it or have you kind of broach this. How do we support undocumented workers who are afraid to sign up for the vaccination?
That's a really good question. What I don't know off the top of my head, and I don't know if Caitlin and Tony know this, is at what level of documentation occurs with the undocumented worker into the governmental systems, and at what level does it put them at risk? I think the previous presidential administration, there was a lot more risk than there is now, but there's certainly not no risk. Do either of you know the answer to those questions?
With undocumented people, it's difficult to really, say a definitive answer because, on the one hand, if I say no and you go and you get a vaccine and then, something were to happen, I would feel like that's on me. And, so it's difficult to give, clear and definite answers. That being said, there are, Caitlin and I as medical students, we just had a class being taught by some great doctors that run the community health center up in Lawrence. And we actually did have a discussion, about, these marginalized groups and, undocumented workers and people that really historically would not have, the best access to some of these things. And, we have doctors and students and really, people that are engaged in the community that are working hard to, provide vaccines to these people. And, both anybody, any marginalized group. And so speaking on, undocumented people at this moment is difficult. However, I will say, I believe that there is hope that, those people that are undocumented, but that are still very much an integral part of, our communities and our society, that they will be able to, there are people working to give people access that access without having that fear. And so I think that, as keep an ear out for the community and for things like that, for groups that really are trying to uplift those communities and provide them some real health care. But unfortunately, to specifically answer that, it's going to be difficult to say yes or no. But I will say that, I know of doctors that are working hard to give that to those communities.
Okay. Thank you. And our last question is, what is the percentage difference between the vaccines? Hospitalization, protection, etc.
So hospitalization and death, 100% effective, all three vaccines. The only place where there's a significant difference is the 72% at preventing infection for Johnson & Johnson versus 95% for Moderna and Pfizer. But if you were Johnson & Johnson, you would say, wait, not fair, because the Moderna and Pfizer were checked before all these variants, and their number might be a little bit lower now, whereas Johnson & Johnson was checked in the environment of these variants. So I think the difference is much less. And ultimately, what's most important is to prevent severe disease and death. And they all do that incredibly well.
I'm gonna use a liberty to cheat a little bit. I have one last question. What about the fact that in terms of all viruses haven't went through all the stages with the FDA? Like where are we at with that and some of the cause of concern around that?
So the FDA has approved emergency use of all three of these vaccines. There's a fourth one called AstraZeneca that may be forthcoming in a few more months, which I'm happy about, because it's good to have a fourth one. It's good to have data from a fourth one. So a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when we need to figure out which one was the best, which one needs a booster, which one, it's good to have options, right? Options are good, Tony.
I want to push you a little bit, Doc. I know Kelvin, producer, may be telling me to be quiet, but what's emergency use, right? You said if used for emergency use, just kind of give us some clarity on that a little bit. Because when you Google it, it's like, yeah.
The
Yeah,
FDA usually takes years and years to approve something.
Okay.
And so they kind of stepped up their game to kind of all get together and read very quickly and review this and review the data,
right,
and not go through their normally kind of slow procedure.
Okay. All right, awesome. So thank you, Dr. Altman. I want to thank you for helping us think big, and I'm excited about this weekend, and I'm excited about all the work in which you provided today. I'm curious, can we, obviously this will actually be recorded, so I guess that's fair. These slides can be shared. But if, let's say some of our folks, I know our mayor is on here, could we share these slides with others? Are you okay with that? Okay, all right. I think it's a lot of great information, possibly a number of our families would benefit from. So thank you. We appreciate you, and we're looking forward to continuing this relationship. So to all the other folks out there, hopefully this was helpful. I know it's helpful for me. I'm excited. I look forward to it. And every day you get me a little closer, Dr. Wayne, to possibly, sticking a needle in the arm. So I look forward to everyone. The fact that we've all learned more today. So good night, and God bless.